Well, good morning. In the next talk, Martin Jones and Justus Winter will talk about cross-site request forgery, how it is done, and how to avoid it. Please give them a warm welcome.
Good morning, Berlin. In the next about 60 minutes, we will talk about cross-site request forgery, also known as session writing. We want to kind of raise awareness that this is actually a serious vulnerability, nothing that can be taken lightly. And then we show you what you can do if you write web applications to avoid cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities. And also we show you what we've done on the client side to protect internet users. Very short words about us. We both come from the University of Hamburg. I'm the researcher, I work at the project Psychologic that you can visit at psychologic.org. Psychologic is about secure software development, especially for web applications. Justus is one of our students and also contributed to Psychologic and kind of our webmaster. Okay, before we talk about cross-site request forgery, we have to briefly talk about web application authentication, because as you probably know already, cross-site request forgery is an attack on web application authentication mechanisms. If you look at these mechanisms, then you can do a classification and you can find two different classes. There's, for one, explicit authentication. Explicit authentication are mechanisms where the web application or the web server itself is responsible for tracking the authenticated state of the user. HTTP is stateless, therefore there has to be an external mechanism that keeps a state between a couple of requests, and with explicit authentication, the web server or the application itself is doing the tracking. There are two major forms. It's URL rewriting. In this case, session tokens are included in every URL, or it's form-based session tokens. In that case, all hyperlinks are replaced by HTML forms that contain the session identifier and a hidden parameter. We won't talk about those today because they are immune against cross-site request forgery. Therefore, if you use those, you should be safe on that side, but those two solutions have other problems, so they are not really recommendable. All the other authentication tracking mechanisms, cookies, HTTP authentication, IP-based schemes, I will tell you later what that is, and client-side SSL, they are all vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. And I will tell you why. All those authentication forms we call implicit authentication. The reason for this is with implicit authentication, the web browser is responsible for doing the tracking of the authenticated state. That means after an initial authentication dialog, so the user logs on, says, "Hi, I'm Martin, my password is foo." The web server does some magic trick to tell the web browser, "Hey, this guy is authenticated." Every further request this guy sends should be authenticated itself. In the next 4 slides, we go briefly about, we'll tell you briefly how those 4 schemes work. I think cookies everybody here knows. Who doesn't know how cookies work? Okay, so anyway, with cookies, after the web server has sent the authenticator cookie, this cookie is included in all further requests to the web server. So all requests that match the domain of the web server that has set this cookie receive the authenticator cookie automatically. And so the web server is able to match HTTP requests to authenticated users. With HTTP authentication, it's a little bit different. It's not that different in practice. The implementation is different. In this case, the authentication mechanism is actually part of the HTTP protocol. The main problem is HTTP is stateless. Therefore, also the authentication mechanism in the HTTP protocol is stateless. For this reason, the web server has to do, the web browser actually does a pretty dirty hack. It goes like that. The client demands some restricted resource, and the web server knows, okay, this resource is restricted and answers not with a 200 found, but with a 401 unauthorized. This causes the web browser to display, please give me a name and password, and those name and password are encoded in the authorization header. And when a request for a restricted resource arrives with an authorization header, the web server checks if in this authorization header the credentials are correct and answers. To avoid that this dialog pops up for every single web page that lives in the restricted directory, the web browser somehow remembers, okay, we already have been authorized against this web server, so he inserts this authorization header automatically further on as long the browser session lives. So again, the web browser itself is doing the authentication. Okay, I'll wait for my excellent laptop here. Okay, client-side SSL. Actually, client-side is pretty nice because we can authenticate the web server, and we can also authenticate the web user. And if we do this, we don't even we prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. But again, this is beyond the scope of the web application itself. The reason for this is SSL lives below HTTP. In the ISO-OSI model, I think it's somewhere between TCP and the application layer. Therefore, the web server itself knows some little bit about SSL, but SSL doesn't know anything about HTTP, HTML. Therefore, we can't really the interaction between the web application and the SSL authentication is pretty much non-existent. For this reason, it's it's again completely automated. The web server says, hey, if you want to get on this page, I need a valid client certificate. The web browser, even often without asking the user, looks, oh, I get this certificate, signs, does some SSL magic, Justus know more about that, and authenticates the user, and the user is authenticated. So SSL is also nice for stuff like single sign-on, because the user often doesn't even know that he just has authenticated himself. With IP-based schemes, this is something different. This is actually kind of dirty hack, but you find it in pretty much every single intranet of every single corporation. We got an intranet web server, and the intranet web server lives behind the intranet firewall. And every web browser in the local net has no problem to go to the intranet web server and log on or access the intranet. Every web browser from outside, from the evil guys or from innocent bystanders that want to get to the intranet web server are rejected by the firewall. And for this reason, the firewall is used as an implicit mean authentication. So not what you have or what you know in this case is the authentication mechanism, but where you are. If you're in the internal net, you're authorized. If you're outside the internal net, you're not authorized. There are more IP-based schemes. You can tell your web server to answer only to local IP addresses or to special IP addresses, or only to requests that come from the local host, or with certain MAC addresses. There are a couple of mechanisms on this layer, because this is on the network layer, but they all work the same and they all are implicit. Okay, what is cross-site request forgery? Cross-site request forgery, for one, is pretty old. The first advisory on cross-site request forgery is now more than 5 years old, and I think this has been exploited even longer. Cross-site request forgery has tons of names. It's XSRF or CSRF. Then there was this lead security company that thought, okay, nobody can really remember those abbreviations, so we call it session writing. And then there were some cool dudes that said session writing doesn't really quit it. We call it csrf, and I think there are even more names for this. So I think this is one of the reasons. Okay, we have a 4-letter acronym, so whoever can remember that. And then we have also 2 other names, and yeah, nobody really knows about cross-site request forgery, what kind of amazes me. The attack is totally simple, if you look at it. The attacker is somehow able to create a hidden HTTP request in the victim's browser. And if the victim has some authorization context with some web application that uses implicit authentication, this request is executed in this authentication context and is authorized. Okay, this is an example. We have our victim here, and the victim is doing some online banking with a very good online bank that doesn't know about cross-site request forgery. And after the initial authentication dialog that is here, the online bank sets the authenticator cookie. And every further interaction that the browser does with the online bank receives this authenticator cookie automatically and is automatically recognized by the bank to be authorized. Then while the guy is doing some online banking, he receives an email and says, hey, look at this web page. This is the most cute cat you ever have seen. And every internet user likes cats, so he stops his online banking, goes to the web page, and hey, wow, this is the best cat he's ever seen. What he doesn't know is that next to the cat, there's a hidden image or a hidden iframe or a hidden foo. He doesn't really care. And this hidden image references CGI of the bank. And the CGI is a transfer CGI and wants to transfer some amount of money to some account. And because the victim is still authorized with his bank, and the bank uses implicit authentication, the cookie, this cookie is added to this request automatically, is received by the bank, and the bank thinks, oh, this guy wants to transfer some money to some account, I will do that, if this bank is really stupid. And we found a lot of stupid applications. So this is session writing, or cross-site request forgery, or csrf. What is the cause? The cause of cross-site request forgery is that the web application fails to verify that the request that needs authorization was created within the application. So it has the origin in the application, and it has the goal in the application, or the target. If I'm pretty sure, cross-site request forgery, we have a cross-site request, and it's forged because it's invisible. So the name actually tells everything. There are two tag methods. One is we can forge GET requests. This is pretty easy. We can do this with image tags or some other tags that create HTTP requests. But we can also forge POST requests if we create, for example, a hidden iframe, and this hidden iframe is filled with a HTML form. The HTML form is then submitted by JavaScript. We can also do this with pop-up windows and other stuff. So POST request forgery is not that hard. If you don't have JavaScript, it's a little bit harder. Then you have to convince the user to click on the web page, but this often is also possible. Hey, you have won. Click on this to get your prize. So this all works. You can do some more classification. There's reflected or local stored cross-site request forgery. Reflected is what I've shown you. The attacker creates a web application or a web page that then does the attack, and therefore the attacker has to somehow convince the victim to visit that page. With local stored, in this case, the application itself allows users to include arbitrary elements into the application that in themselves create HTTP requests. For example, if you have a bulletin board, and this bulletin board allows users to upload images of themselves, and the URL is not checked if there's really an image behind that, then you can create an image URL that points back to the application itself and does something stateful like delete everything or log the user out. So local attacks are pretty nasty. They are really hard to find, and they are really hard to defend. Therefore, this is something the application developers themselves have to look after. We have found tons of real-world exploits, and in the next 4 slides, we will show you a couple of more interesting finds. This is something that wasn't discovered by us, but by, I don't even know. But this is a nice example how real-life applications that actually have customers, and they actually, where money is made with, are vulnerable. And this is, in this case, Netflix. Netflix is an online DVD rental place where you can rent DVDs with a web interface, and you say, I want to watch the Goodfellas, and then this place sends you the DVD. And when you send the DVD back, you get the next DVD, and some money is deducted from your account. With cross-site request forgery, an attacker was able to add arbitrary movies to the rental queue, to change the order. Okay, he doesn't want to watch Goodfellas, he should watch The Big Lebowski. So I add that to the queue and put it in front. But he also is able to change the name and the address. So he thinks, actually, I want to watch The Big Lebowski. So I change this guy's address to mine address, and then I get The Big Lebowski. And this guy shouldn't really know that I rented The Big Lebowski on his name. So I also changed the email address and the password. And the only thing I don't change is the account number, because I don't want to pay for these nice DVDs. So this was really serious, and I don't know how long it was open. It's now fixed. Then this is something we found at University of Hamburg. WordPress is a well-known web application for weblogs. And WordPress, every weblog should look different, because we all are different, and this is what our weblogs communicate. And therefore we can WordPress allows the users to change the templates of the application. And as WordPress is a web application, the template editor is a web application itself. And was not secured against cross-site request forgery. And what makes things worse is that WordPress templates are PHP files. So if you know which general theme the user uses, and pretty much every user, there are like 4 or 5 really popular WordPress themes, and if you know those, then you could send this guy a link to a page with a cat, and when this guy goes on this page with the cat, his WordPress now has some more PHP code that you control, and you can take over his web server. Then there's this new meme called JavaScript malware. This is, when you look closer at JavaScript malware is nothing more than doing cross-site request forgery on IP-based schemes. There has been some research, and they found out that you can use JavaScript and image inclusion to do stuff like port scanning if you know some IP addresses. And you want to port scan, obviously, intranets. So what you do is you take this vulnerable or this malicious JavaScript, put it on a web page, and send it to somebody behind a firewall where you want to see what's inside this firewall or behind the firewall. He looks at the web page. We have the malicious JavaScript that does some port scanning intranet and sends you back the data. So this is kind of ugly. There are really nice exploitation frameworks already available. And this is a screenshot of Beef. I think you can find it if you look for Beef and browser, because Beef is for browser exploitation something framework. And this is amazing. And also I think this is a really, really big issue, because every corporate application has an intranet. And most of the intranets either use no authentication or some automatic magic, like NTLM or client-side SSL. And every corporation allows their web users to serve the web, because this is kind of important for research and also for entertainment. And with these techniques, those internet servers are completely open to the world. You can do some DNS stuff that we found out at University of Hamburg as well, to actually get the stuff that is on the web pages. So there are right now good techniques to get the contents of all internet web servers, to find those internet web servers and to get the contents of those internet web servers. And also the other stuff. So I think cross-site request forgery is a big problem, and we think it can be changed on the user side. We can change the web browser to make it less of an issue. And so I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I met the chief corporate security from Mozilla Corporation. And she looked at pretty much every talk but mine. So I thought, okay, she knows about this stuff. She cares. And then I went to her and said, hey, you're at Mozilla, and what do you think about this? And this should be changed. And she was totally dismissive. And she thinks it's not a big issue, and users should be careful. And Firefox is an end-user product and not for corporate usage. And so it's no kidding. She told me that. And so I told Justus that, and Justus was, okay, they probably know what cross-site request forgery is. And he looked at some code Mozilla wrote.
I looked at Mozilla, a well-known bug tracking system developed at Mozilla. And actually, Mozilla Mozilla's Bugzilla is vulnerable against session writing. So I do have an exploit. They do know about this. And they don't really care though. They do know about it, but it's not important enough to fix it in a minor release. Can we turn the microphone a bit down? Yeah? Okay. And developing exploits is really easy, but this one was not that easy. It takes about 5 minutes to do so, but this one took actually 10 minutes because I had to look at the source code of Bugzilla, which is Perl. And you just leave out one parameter for the form, and it works fine. So I don't know, it was quite easy.
If you're interested in finding out how to do this in 5 minutes, I think Justus has a lightning talk today where it tells you how to write exploits for your own web applications, cross-site request forgery.
Live, and 5 minutes for a working application out there.
Okay, so I think we all agree now cross-site request forgery is a problem. And the main problem is that cross-site request forgery or session writing or CSRF or how we want to call it, those vulnerabilities are not really caused by programming mistakes. If you look at any HTML book, and I've looked at lots, there's not one single HTML book that tells you about this stuff or how to avoid it. The reason is that this implicit authentication foo is outside of the scope of HTTP or HTML. Therefore, if you write textbook HTML code or textbook web applications, and your textbook is older than like 2005, your code that looks completely correct and is like from the book or from some web page is vulnerable. If we want to prevent session writing, cross-site request for the CSRF or whatever, if we want to prevent that, we actually have to fix the protocol. Because this, I think I've told you everything about that. There are 3 reasons for that. We don't have a dedicated authentication credential in web browsers and HTTP and anything. Cookies are not meant for authentication. HTTP authentication is not meant for authentication tracking, but for one single request. Client-side SSL doesn't really work as well, and who relies on a firewall for authentication should be shot anyway. Then we have a lot of state-changing GET requests. And this is something where the HTTP or the internet draft says you shouldn't do this. We have post for state-changing. GET is something to get information, post is to do something stateful. But application developers doesn't care about that. And we have JavaScript, and JavaScript is a security nightmare by itself. Okay, if you develop web applications, you should try to avoid this problem. And in the next 3 slides, we will tell you how to do that. Before we tell you how to do that, we tell you how not to do it. Because this is another thing. There are a lot of misconceptions. And still, I think in the top 10 hits by Google, or at least last weekend was that case, there's still at least one page that tells you something wrong. The first misconception that lived for a long, long time is if you only accept post requests, you're safe. You don't have a problem with cross-site request forgery. Because cross-site request forgery is including an image somewhere, and with an image you only can create and get requests. So if you only accept post requests, the attacker is out of luck. This is completely untrue. You can do this if we showed you with a hidden iframe and some JavaScript, or with a pop-up window and some social engineering, and you can create arbitrary post requests. Then the next misconception is that if you check your referrer, you are safe. And this is half a misconception, or like a quarter misconception, or maybe because the referrer actually should give us the information that we want, that this request comes from our web application and goes to our web application. So it's an inner web application request, and is therefore should be authorized. The problem is there are many, many people that don't send referrers for privacy reasons, and I think this is a good idea to do so. But there are people that spoof referrers for different reasons, for circumventing some access control, or just for confusing Google. And for this reason, you at least have to accept, if you do a large-scale application, not something in your corporation, then you maybe can rely on referrers, but if you do something like YouTube or something big that you want everybody in the world should use, then you have to accept requests that don't contain any referrer information. Because there are about 1/4 of the requests that don't have one. Because, for example, a lot of people don't even know that they're suppressing referrers. If you have, like Cario personal firewall or some other personal firewall thing installed or some anti-spyware, they often drop referrers without even letting the user know. So you have this big chunk of requests without referrers, and if you don't want to lose like 1/3 of your potential customers, you have to accept those requests. And we looked a little bit deeper into the web browsers, and we found for every browser but Opera, at least 1 or 2 methods where a web application can create referrerless requests on a web browser that is configured to send referrers. So relying on referrers, if you accept referrerless requests, you're lost. So you shouldn't do this. Furthermore, there are, I think, every 3 or 4 months there comes another advisory, usually from Emmett Klein from Israel, that finds another way how to spoof referrers. First, he had something where you could spoof referrers with HTTP response splitting. Then he looked at Flash and found out that with Flash 8 point something, you could spoof referrers because you can send arbitrary header values into HTTP requests. And I think there are still a lot of new undiscovered ways to spoof referrers. So you should not rely on referrers. What can you do? At first, I told you explicit authentication is immune against cross-site request forgery. Therefore, you can just switch to explicit authentication. URL rewriting or form-based. The problem with URL rewriting is that you have then so-called session identifier leakage. If you have your session identifier, this is a really sensitive information because whoever has the session identifier is pretty much you, because he knows your authentication context. If you have this in the URL, then it's stored in proxy logs and is sent over the wire, and also is sent via referrers if you don't do anything about that. So if you don't really know, if you really know what you're doing and how to get rid of the referrers and how to do some sanity checks if you receive a session identifier that you don't really trust, don't do that. With form-based session tokens that are better because they are, the session identifier is communicated in the post part of the web page, you have usability problems because the back button often does funny things if you try to go through a lot of clicks that were created by submitting HTML forms. So this is not a good solution either. What I kind of like, but what I haven't seen once, and I don't know why, is if you would combine explicit and implicit authentication. So you have like a request identifier in your URL and a session identifier in your cookie, and you need both information to be authenticated, then you're in the clear. But this is something you don't want to program yourself as well. You need a framework to do that, and there's no framework out right now that does this out of the box. And SID leakage in the referrer still might be a little problem, but I won't go too deep in that. This is what you should do. This is what the recommendation of the day is. If you have an HTML form that does anything that needs authentication and does anything stateful, you should use one-time nonces so that the web application itself is able to verify, okay, this guy is sending a post request because I gave him the form before. So if the web application has to do mapping between a user session identifier and this one-time value, and only post requests that contain such a one-time value are acceptable. Everything else will be thrown away. Yeah. Also, you can protect against local attacks. So if you allow users to use arbitrary images for their user profiles, you should serve them yourself. You should download them and serve them from your web page so that you have the URL under control. This is also kind of, you should know what you're doing, because if you do it wrongly, you allow users to host arbitrary data on your web server, and this is something you don't want to do as well. If you have a web application where you don't have the source code, or it's written in COBOL and you don't know any COBOL or anything else in this direction, you can try to use the web application firewall approach. Here's one described in a paper from the Vienna group that is doing a lot of web security research. It's a reverse proxy, and this reverse proxy pretty much tries to do what we described in this page automatically. So it passes, come back, it passes all the HTML stuff that is coming through it and tries to insert one-time nonsense. So I don't know if they have any code out there. I think if you write them an email, they will send you the code, but they haven't released anything yet. Cross-site request forgery is an attack on the user and not on the server. And a lot of web applications don't care about, they don't know what cross-site request forgery is, or they don't care, like the Mozilla people. So we thought, okay, we know how to do it on the server, but we kind of still have to figure out how to protect the users. And so we try to create a client-side protection against cross-site request forgery. And Justus is the main developer, so in the next slides he will tell you what we've done to protect the user.
Okay. So now you know what session writing is all about. And Martin told you how to protect your web applications against session writing by switching to explicit authentication wherever possible. But we'd like to try to protect you as a user of web applications against session writing. And how do we do that? It's simple. We just remove all implicit authentication credentials, such as cookies or HTTP authentication things from requests that do not originate in the web application itself. And we deny requests that on resources that are not accessible from the outside of a corporate firewall. We have to deny those because there is no authentication to strip. Okay, our software is called Request Audio, and it's actually a proxy, an HTTP proxy implemented in Python. It's based on the Twisted framework for writing network applications. And what do? We say our request is entitled if the referrer matches the target site. So it's, we just compare the host name and the port, and if it matches, it's entitled. And we also check if the requested resource is accessible from the outside. We do that by using a reflection server, just an HTTP proxy that's located outside the corporation's firewall. And if it's not entitled, we just strip all authentication credentials, proxy, cookies and things. And if we detected that our resource is not accessible from the outside, we just block it. Our proxy has a whitelist because users won't use this proxy if it breaks their favorite web application. You just need a whitelist, even if it's not a nice solution to have one. So there are some problems. We cannot rely on the referrer header the browser sends, as Martin told you. It's possible to create referrerless requests. We have actually test cases there. You can open your notebook and check your browser. And so we need to track the user ourselves. And we do that by creating a tag, just a random number, for each URL the user visits. And then we attach this tag to all links and all formulas in the HTML page. And if we get the next request, because the user clicked on one of those links, we get this normal spec, and we just do an database lookup, and we know where the user came from. But there are some problems. There are lots and lots of URLs in an HTML page. So there are links, there are image tags. You have some JavaScript source that can change the location of a web application. And you have CSS. You can have redirects by HTTP, by the server. And there are lots and lots of locations I forgot or just don't know about. We also decided not to use an XML parser to parse the HTML page for two reasons. One being that HTML is often badly formed XML, so you really need a robust XML parser. And the second thing is you need to parse JavaScript, and you cannot do that with an XML parser. So we just use regular expressions, which is kind of a hack. Okay, there are more problems. We have to support HTTPS, which is HTTP over SSL, which is used to ensure the data's origin and integrity. So if you're doing an security enhancement on the browser, you need to support HTTPS. And SSL is designed to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. But this is exactly what we need to do. We need to parse the HTML response, and we need to modify it. So we need to do a man-in-the-middle against SSL. And how do we do that? So let's take a look at HTTP proxying, like it's done by Squid, for example. The client sends a connect request. It's one is here. It's just then connect to this host on this port. And the proxy opens a TCP connection to that port and just passes all data through. And of course, the idea is that the proxy does not understand what the client and the server are talking about. But we need to do that. We need to modify our stream, and we need to parse our stream. So, how do we do that? It's simple. We just don't. But we remove the SSL layer from the client to the proxy. So we just act as an HTTPS gateway. This has been done before. It's nothing new, but I haven't seen it in an open source application. Maybe there are some, I don't know. In order to do that, we change every HTTP URL into an HTTP one, and remember that we, in fact, are using HTTPS. So HTTPS on example.org is transferred into HTTP example.org port 443. We do a little trick. We create a page telling the user what's going on, that we are initiating an SSL handshake with a given host. And this page contains an image from the originating from the server. And for just one request, our proxy is set to the traditionally HTTPS proxying solution, so it accepts and connect request once. And now the client talks directly to the server, and they can do the SSL handshake, and the proxy monitors this handshake, which is not encrypted, and inherits this decision. So if the client says, okay, it's fine, the certificate is okay, the proxy knows that. But there are lots and lots of locations for URLs, as I've showed, and we just need to get every URL in a page, or else we break something.
So does this break bookmarks?
That's an interesting question. Our proxy solution breaks bookmarks because we do not know where they came from. We have no referrer for this. So yes, every click on a bookmark, or if we enter an URL in the address bar, we get a false positive. That is not nice. This is one of those problems, actually. Lots and lots of false positives. And it has some advantages to implement request rodeo as a proxy, such as ease of deployment. You can just deploy it in a corporate environment, and it works. And it's actually a browser-independent solution. We've tested it with all major browsers, and it just works. But there are disadvantages, lots. It's quite hard and requires lots and lots of code to track the user's movement. And the SSL thingies are not trivial either. So maybe there's a better solution. And yes, there is. We started developing a Firefox plugin, which does exactly the same, but in a nicer way. Okay. So this is our homepage. Request rodeo is hosted on Savannah, and there are actually 2 test cases. One, to check if your browser is vulnerable against session writing. That's this one. You can just enter it and try it out for yourself. And the second one, to test if it's possible with your browser to generate referrer-less requests. So, thank you. That was our talk.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
We still have like 20 minutes left and have some backup slides. Because we want to... Justus just said, we just remove implicit authentication. It's no problem. And the truth is, this is a problem. And
you can also make a demonstration.
Oh yeah, we have tons of content still left. So.
Great.
So I go just briefly over our hard work to get rid of the removal.
Oh.
Whoa, Apple, go. On the removal of implicit authentication. So getting rid of cookie implicit authentication is easy. We just drop the cookie field in the HTTP request and we're all set. But client-side SSL, we can't even do with our proxy solution, so we haven't implemented it, because if with client-side SSL, our hack that Justus just described doesn't work, because this is what client-side SSL is for, to prevent something like that. We still have then 2 things to go, IP-based authentication and HTTP authentication. Okay, I told you that. Let's go to the graphics. Justus already told you what we did, but I think to better show it, we are like visual people, as Dan Kaminsky told us 2 days ago, so we look at this big picture. So with a malicious site, and this malicious site, someone eventually wants to get on our internet web server. And to verify that all requests, unentitled requests that are created somehow, are allowed to get to some locations, we have this reflection server. How does it work? The web browser tries to get a web page from the malicious site. Our solution request rodeo talks to the reflection server and asks the reflection server, hey, are you able to get to this site? Is this a public available site? Because this request is not within an application, therefore it's unentitled, therefore we don't trust it. The reflection server looks and says, yeah, I can get to this site, so you're allowed to get the HTML data. So you're allowed to look at the cute cat. The cute cat brings his evil companion, and the evil companion tries to now access the internet web server to leak some information. Again, this request is not entitled. We don't trust it because this comes from attacker.org and wants to go to HTTP intranet. Therefore, request rodeo again asks the reflection server and says, hey, reflection server, can you get to this? And this is where the reflection server, the position of the reflection server comes into the game. The reflection server is in the DMZ outside the inner firewall. For this reason, the reflection server has the same access rights as everything outside the company and inside the internet. We have an outer and outer firewall that not everybody is able to get to our reflection server, and also maybe to sniff this traffic. You don't want to route all your traffic through the internet. And in this case, the reflection server tries to get to the internet web server. The inner firewall says, no, 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 what are you doing? And so the reflection server denies this request, and we see a warning maybe, or maybe we don't see nothing, anything. Depends on the case. So this was actually doable. With HTTP authentication, we had even bigger problems. Simply removing the authorization header doesn't work. And this kind of sucks, and I'll show you why that is. We have the client, we have our proxy in the middle, and we have the server. And the client has an untrusted request that somehow has an authorization header by browser magic. If we simply remove this authorization header and send it to the server answers with 401 unauthorized, and we would pass that 401 unauthorized to the user. The user enters, "Hi, I'm Martin, my password is foo." And what is then done, the browser automatically just simply creates a new request to the same resource, and the authorization header is completely the same as well, because the credentials have not changed. So on the proxy side, we have no way to differentiate between the first and the second request. For the proxy, they completely look the same. And if we just say, okay, we have removed some authorization header to the server, so this one must be authorized because we have now implicit authentication, we run in timing problems, because the malicious guy can try to create a lot of those requests before this dialog is shown up, and then we are hacked. So we can't do that. Therefore, we have to do some magic again. Okay, again, we see an untrusted request that has an authorization header. Instead of removing the authorization header, we first answer with a 301 move temporarily. And we go to the same resource, but in this case, we add our little tag. So then we know, okay, this request that now is created because we sent the 302 move temporary and because we removed this authorization header. The web browser itself doesn't know that anything has happened, so the web browser thinks, okay, this GET request was okay, therefore he again adds the authorization header. But now we are able to remove the authorization header, and then we have two options. For one, we can just pass it on to the server, or we just answer ourselves with a 401 unauthorized. We've implemented both solutions, and this is more convenient, so we do this. Well, actually, we do the other one. Which solution do we? You have to look in the code. It's open source, but it works. And now, with a 401 unauthorized, here comes then enter your credentials, and this authorization header we know we can trust, because in this case, now we have our tag here, and with the tag we know, okay, this tag and this authorization header can go to the server, and the server can send us the restricted data. Okay, last page before the demo. Cross-site request forgery is a big problem, and even if Mozilla doesn't think so, we think so, and I think the past has told us right. Therefore, if you do web applications, use nonces, and if you use a web application and you don't use request rodeo, use one application at a time. Don't use Firefox with 50 tabs on, and every tab has some authorization information. This is something you should not do. And also reject long-lived cookies. If you use Gmail, log out afterwards. Okay, Gmail is not vulnerable right now, but there are others, so be careful. Okay. Now, well, we still have like 50 minutes, so let's go to the demo.
Okay. Okay, this is our proxy, just a simple Python script. and we switch to it. Great. And I can show you 3 things. The first thing is HTTP stuff, HTTPS stuff. So I will go to this one. It's an HTTPS stuff site, and just watch closely. We get an intermediate site informing us what's going on, and because we send along some JavaScript magic, it's a completely automatic process. It shows the page, it authenticates, it initiates SSL connection using the embedded image, and it does some polling using XML HTTP requests, and if the proxy says, okay, the handshake is done, it will forward to the original page. So watch closely. This is the image. Oh, it's a slow computer. It's great to see. So now we have HTTPS over HTTP. You can see the port here. And we actually insert some HTML code to inform the user what's going on. And because I entered the address, there's no referrer to it. So it removed any cookie. I hope there wasn't any. And if we hover one link on the page, you see this is our tag for the page http events congress ccc.de port 443 congress 2006 lightning talks. So if we click on any link, we have this tag here. The proxy knows where we came from, so it says, okay, I have a reliable referrer, it's okay. So, now to the bad stuff. Okay. If I hover another link, you can see this is if not the same value as reload? Escape. Yeah, great. As this. Okay? It's just a random number. Okay. So I have this test page on session writing. It's actually very simple. I click on a link on the domain winter.goddns.org, and it's just a PHP script that sets a header and cookie. So it's there. I go back, and I click on the post or get request. It's just in simple form on an PHP script that tries to get the cookie back, and there isn't any. Anyone tried it? No one? Great. Okay.
If you don't believe us, try it at home.
I can show it with the Firefox plugin. So, and if we hover our little div, the proxy informs us that there was something going on. We switched domains and it removed the cookies. So, we're safe. And just to show you that HTTP authentication is also handled by our proxy, I will log in here. It's just an HTTP basic authentication. Yeah, we want. Oh, okay, it's just foo and bar. So now we are authenticated. Let's head back and try to follow a link, an HTTP GET request to a another host. And if we are authenticated, still authenticated, our session would have been written. Let's see. And now it actually requires us to enter new credentials explicitly. Okay, we say cancel, and it's done. There is this Firefox plugin I mentioned. It's here, down here. Great. It's a prototype, but it is able to remove cookies. So let's see. Just reload this page. Ah, crap. So our little green box is gone. And we set this cookie here. It should be there, but just to be sure, it's set. This is the pure Firefox browser without our plugin. So if you follow a post request, there is the cookie, and this session has been written by the referring site. So let's enable our plugin. Some magic. And if we now try to get our cookie back, it's gone. We are safe. Yoo-hoo! Woo-hoo! Okay. That's it.
Yeah. Right on time.
Questions? Do we have a mic? Yeah.
With the proxy, if you go to a HTTPS site, you don't have the certificate anymore. So how would you be sure that you're on the right site and it's not a phishing site?
Okay, I'll just show you. I'll enable it. And I head over to an HTTPS site which hasn't any valid certificate, or I do not have the root certificate. So let's see. Sorry, Millie. So this is the page the proxy created, and there is this image that hasn't been loaded yet because we did not click on OK. So I'm in full control of whether to trust this certificate or not, because this image is loaded directly through an connect method. So I can examine this certificate, check if it's valid or not, if I want to trust it or not, and if I decide yes, I want to trust it, or if my browser decides to trust it because I have a root certificate, I say okay. And the handshake is done, the proxy monitors the handshake, and we get forwarded.
Yeah, but now you can't see anymore if there is a valid certificate. And
Yes.
For normal users, we say check if you can see it in the URL bar and on the right side below the page if it's a phishing site or not. And what should the normal users do now?
Yes, that's right. That's a problem. We have some problems integrating our proxy into the user interface of the browser, and that's one of the things the Firefox plugin can do better, much better. And with this solution, if you just add some random HTML code to a page, this is totally spoofable. So our proxy implementation was more or less just a proof of concept implementation.
Also, I still have to see one of the average users that look at this thing in the border and knows what it does and really knows what a certificate is and stuff. So I think everybody, we have heard this question already, but I don't think this is a big issue. But we're working on that with the Firefox extension, of course. More questions?
You mentioned that you use picture fetch from the original HTTPS site
Yes.
to initiate a handshake. What do you do if the target page doesn't even have any images on it? Do you try to fetch a random?
That's not a problem because if there isn't any image, we just get in
For a fallback.
Yes, and this is sent over an SSL connection as well. So we just want the handshake image or not.
Okay, I think we're out of time. If you have more questions, come to us like in a second.